the St. Helena SHAPE Committee meeting for November 29th. We need what?
1 minute.
1 minute. I had my eyes looked at today, but I thought that clock said 6:30, but Now I can call the meeting to order? Okay, I'm calling the meeting to order for the City SHAPE Committee meeting of November 29th. And I think we do a roll call.
Chair Smithers.
Here.
Vice Chair Chateau.
Here.
Committee Member Barr.
Here.
Caldwell.
Here.
Dell.
Here.
Feeney. Knight.
Here.
Neiman.
Here.
Park.
Here.
Sylvestrin.
Here.
And Smith.
Here.
Okay, next on the agenda would be public comment. Anybody in the audience that wants to bring any comments, questions to the committee before we get further on in the agenda? Okay, John? Yeah.
A simple question about direction and how you flow. Perhaps it's online and a little computer problem today, but what the charge is to SHAPE and to whom, when, after certain things, X, Y, and Z happen, like you're, visiting facilities, the things that, last week, deliberations you have leading to some kind of recommendations and conclusions, to whom and when will they be made, with what probability of effectiveness? In other words, is it something that will go to the city council and then they will work it all over again? Or what's the shape?
Okay. Oh, that was John Thoreen, South Crane. No, we're going to bring all these recommendations to City Council, and they're going to take 100% of them and just implement them all. That's no. So the process, at least, without thumbing through binders, I'll try to. We're trying to get a lot of baseline data. So we are getting a baseline data. We've gone and visited the facilities. Tonight we're mostly focused on the long-range financial forecast that was prepared nearly 3 years ago. We are going to be embarking on an updated long-range financial forecast to get a financial baseline for town. We've got consultants that are doing a needs assessment and reviewing all the facilities, and we'll be coming back with information about the conditions of the facilities and what's needed to bring them up to where they should be, or they may be making recommendations that we just tear the thing down and raise it and start all over again. I think that also will be including valuations of the properties, and then we have another consulting group that's going to help us with. They're more into municipal government financing and that sort of thing, and ways to, because obviously we're going to go through all these facilities, and we're going to have this big list of what do we need to do, and after a lot of public outreach, as well as what does town think of the facilities and whether or not we have everything we need as a community, and we'll put all that together, and also with these municipal finance consultants, and try to come up with a plan of how to address all the issues and the wants and desires of everybody in town, and present it to City Council. That's, in a nutshell, I guess that's pretty quick,
Target, hopeful time frame?
I haven't looked at the calendar that far out, but I'm guessing like 5 months. I don't know. I mean, end of April?
Sometime in April.
Okay, so it's December, end of April. I guess I'm pretty close, and nothing gets done on time, so it'll probably go a little longer. But, this has been going on. My comment is, we've sort of been, things have been neglected, buildings, facilities, et cetera, for probably over 20 years. So if we slip a month, I don't think that's a terrible thing. If as long as we do a thorough analysis and hear from the public and bring something to the City Council that's worthwhile. I don't know if any other committee members have any comments on that.
Thank you.
Okay. If there's no more public comments, we can move on to consent items. And I think we just need a motion for the consent items unless somebody wants to pull one and discuss it. Thank you for nodding your head because I'm sort of... The two consent items are 4.1 and 4.2, which are the minutes of the last two meetings.
I move to approve.
Second.
So, vote, roll call.
Chair Smithers,
Yes.
Vice Chair Chateau,
Yes.
Committee Member Barr,
Yes.
Caldwell,
Yes.
Dell,
Yes.
Feeney, Knight,
Yes.
Neiman,
Yes.
Park, Sylvestrin,
Yes.
Smith.
Yes.
Okay, under new business, the next item is facility tour debriefing. We wanted to give everybody an opportunity to, spend 5-10 minutes, probably no more than 10 minutes, on just their impressions of the facility tour and any comments they wanted to make and throw out there to the general public and the rest of the committee. So I guess we could start with you, Doug, and we could go around this way. I picked on you because you were writing down things. So
Yeah, writing. First of all, the city did a wonderful job, Allison, in organizing that tour. It was well done. We were prompt. We were finished a little bit early. And every question that I heard asked was answered. It was really, really great. Is that working? No? Okay. My biggest impression was that what we lack in terms of facilities in general is an overall plan for how we treat the facilities that the city owns and how we intend to maintain them over the years that's consistent from administration and to city staff as they change. We need somebody that remains, that is in charge of those facilities and maintaining those facilities, and contracts for maintenance in those facilities, and some help for that staff person. There's nobody there whose job it is specifically to do those things. The young guy who took us around, Carlos's job is to do that and also maintain trees and also maintain parks and a whole bunch of different jobs. So realistically, it seemed to me that what we need is somebody who is the city's director of facilities, and then he might have a part-time staff or some kind of a staff that's an electrician and a plumber, so that they can do some of this maintenance on their own, and when it gets bigger, he's the guy who organizes that. But that the city owns a lot of property, and we don't really have anybody that manages this property as their specific task, it seems, including cleaning. Some of the carpets were absolutely filthy. Places were just incredibly dirty, and when I asked about that, he said, yeah, we have a crew that comes in. There were issues for almost every facility that did not seem to me to be existential. We should tear this place down, but that desperately needed to be fixed. Everything from roaches to leaks, things that are band-aided because there's nobody there whose job it is to really take care of the whole thing. So it ends up that the police chief is on a weekend rebuilding an area, fixing some plumbing and wiring. It's a crazy way for any place that owns a lot of property to protect that property. So, and this has been going on seemingly for a long time. So it seems to me that that's one of the key things that the city ought to look at, and this committee should recommend that we take care of.
Thank you. Stan?
Hi, my name is Stan Knight. I wanted to second that and thank Allison for setting up the tour and for Carlos for leading it. It was really interesting, and I understand there are some follow-up tours open to the public that I would highly recommend anyone who can to join the public tours. It was very enlightening, really informative. One of the impressions I got was that the facilities, the functions of the city are spread around across disparate facilities.
City Hall doesn't work well, I guess would be a nice way to put it, just as far as the departments and the flow and the space provisions. One of the thoughts, or one of the ideas that came across to me was that there was a lot of focus on facilities maintenance and problems with maintenance, or not problems with maintenance, but deferred maintenance, issues that need repair. But it made me think about, should we take a more holistic or strategic view of the facilities and the assets, and see if, as a part of this process, we can't recommend or find a way to do some facilities consolidation and migration to make the overall the departments a little more integrated and a little more logically located and maybe more contiguous. The facilities were pretty spread out. Lots of different types of buildings, lots of different locations. So one thought I had would be, could we find a way or just have a strategic objective of finding a way to pull some of the physical offices and seating and departments closer together in perhaps new locations or location. But it was, again, I would really urge or recommend that any members of the public that can avail themselves of the tour, it would be great. I think I probably used up my time. Thank you.
Okay. Joshua?
Yeah, I don't have too much to add. Just generally, it's kind of a consequence of hodgepodge of doing something here and doing something there, and the end result is what we have.
I'm going to pull that mic down just so it gets on.
It's just a hodgepodge of effort to do one thing to make a space for somebody and move on and do another little something for somebody else, and it's all discombobulated and it's a big mess.
That put it succinctly.
I too, looking around, felt like it just needed a lot of work, especially safety, and I was really struck by thinking about and knowing all of the community needs for the buildings, and that we really need to be aware of that, especially with the Carnegie building, and I've seen and experienced part of my daily life seeing how much the community uses it with all the children in town, and then just talking to different parents and realizing they would talk about things like, does the fire safety or different things, is that really safe? And looking around, it seemed like there's definitely some things that need to be focused on. And then as a group, we just really need to be aware of who uses that space and make sure that their needs are being met. That's it.
Thank you. Glenn?
I think things have been pretty well said. I guess I was struck by the poor condition of the facilities. There were several buildings, especially the City Hall, that I thought were in very, very poor condition. I was really taken aback by the Corporation Yard. That's just a disaster, and anybody that wants to drive up there should take a look at it. Maybe at flood stage would be a good time. The City Hall is way overutilized. Most of the other facilities, it seemed to me, were underutilized. Again, there's a good opportunity to look at these strategically, as was said earlier, and think about which buildings have a future and which don't, at least with respect to city government. Thank you.
This is going to start sounding redundant because people have said most of what I have to say. I will second that the tour was really great. It was an eye-opener. There was at least one building that I didn't even know we owned, so it was extremely informative to go on the tour and see the condition of everything. There are clearly significant maintenance issues across the board due to years of neglect, and I would agree with Glenn's comment. There were several properties that seemed to be very underutilized, and there's a lot of opportunity for moving some things around. And I'm encouraged once we get through the data gathering stage and the problem assessment, and this group gets sort of a plan put together, that we can get really creative on how to put together some nice alternatives that we can take a look at that hopefully will solve the city's needs and will be the kind of solutions that the public can buy into.
Well, I've seen some of these buildings already inside and out over the years, and I can't sugarcoat it. I was depressed, and I found it like dilapidated buildings and slum environments. My overall impression was I was embarrassed, and I was a little bit shamed that having our city workers work under these conditions where they're having to walk around buckets with water dripping on them, having to trip over carpet with uneven flooring, et cetera, et cetera. Some of the buildings had mold, and it was like enough. And it's like you can't expect people to work under these conditions and expect optimum output. I think that if you really want good workers and to retain them, and people to be happy and to produce and to fulfill the needs of the city, you need to provide a really great environment for them. And just think of yourself. I couldn't imagine working in those offices. So I think it's time that we face up to it and take care of this and fix it once and for all.
Well, I think there's been enough description of the condition of the buildings that I'm not going to, comment more on that. Two things that weren't mentioned: cockroaches. I mean, get an exterminator. It seems to me you shouldn't wait to do that. And it seems to me that leaky roofs need to be at least temporarily patched. Right now we're getting into the rainy season. And there was one place, Oliver, where they didn't even have a bucket. It was just dripping on the floor. So I want to mention some more things about utilization. City Hall is really crowded with desks everywhere. I did see some large office spaces. And I wondered if there's any possibility, until a final decision is made, that some of those employees, instead of having a large office, that office could be divided into workstations. Because there's one person that's like working out in the hall, and I think it must be really hard to concentrate working in those conditions. And then I became aware that a lot of staff members work 4-day weeks. And I'm wondering if there could be some office or desk sharing if everyone wasn't off on their 4-day week on the same day, as in Friday or Monday. It's just a possibility. The police department's really a complex issue. It is pathetic that the chief of police is having to build a women's locker room. I mean, that's just not a good situation. I wonder if people have to be put into a jail cell, if they couldn't automatically just go to Napa, if they couldn't be transported to Napa. Because the jail cells I guess they're not meant to be comfortable, but I was shocked at how terrible they are, and the toilets don't flush properly and things like that. So that's a thought. The fire station is not possible to determine if it's utilized because it is what it is. It's an emergency facility. I think they do have enough room there for most of their training. And we certainly, as a community, have enjoyed using their large conference room since we're without any kind of community facility for that. Scout Hall, as I understand it, is used twice a month. Once a month for Girl Scouts, once a month for Boy Scouts. And I think that building has the capability of being used for a couple of apartments, maybe for the firemen, I don't know. The teen center is definitely underutilized. We were told that about 6 teens drop in a month. It's in a bad location. It's very far from the high school, so it's hard for teens to even get there, especially in bad weather. So it would really be a good idea to determine possibly a better use for that. I know that's a prime site for building workforce housing as well. And then there's the office building. I didn't know that the city owned that, right next door to the south, 1572. It was my understanding this building could be empty by the end of December. And I would sort of say the opposite of what Doug Barr said. I sort of hate to see the city, that Stan said as far as consolidation. Because my thought was when that building is empty, it's in pretty good shape. it seemed to be dry and warm and decent in there, that maybe an entire department or two could move over there, such as the planning department or maybe the public works department, to relieve some of the complex situation in City Hall. The library is utilized to the maximum. What could I say? It would be nice to have the roof fixed and the elevator working, but it's utilized. The Carnegie Building is definitely underutilized. Its use is somewhat limited by the broken elevator, and the stairs are really pretty steep, so the building is not ADA compliant. And then the Head Start building at Crane Park. Again, I sort of heard of that building, but I had no idea the city owned it. This is used for 1 month in the summer. I think moving the teen center there is a possibility, and it is close to the high school. The Corporation Yard, it's so pitiful, I don't even know what to say about it. It needs drastic changes. This is a very poor place to consider putting housing. Signorelli Barn. I have to confess that I love this building. I've always loved this building. And when I walk inside of it, it's just crying for theater. I have a nephew in Washington State that just got married in such a venue. I think venues like that are rather popular for weddings. So I think this could be used for multiple community functions. Parking might be a problem, but people could park at Melly Park. So I'd love to see something happen with that. And then I had one more suggestion. It's regarding record storage. There are boxes of records everywhere. And I think the city should rent a couple of large storerooms at St. Helena Storage or elsewhere, move the records over there. They're pretty well organized now. I got the feeling that they were, at least the boxes were labeled, and they could be put into storage, and then if and when they're digitized, the company that's going to do that could just go into St. Helena Storage and not be underfoot in City Hall.
Thank you.
How do you follow all of that? That's wonderful, Pat. And just one little comment on Scout Hall. It probably will always remain to be Scout Hall, as it was given to the city, the building, in 1938 by Mrs. Smith, who made sure she stipulated that Scout Hall is always Scout Hall. So to make it apartments and such would probably...
Thank you, I didn't know that.
It's deed restricted, I think. But everyone else, I mean, I think we're going to be a great committee, and it's going to be fun trying to figure out what to do with all of these problems. I mean, knowing that the office building down on Railroad Avenue is going to be empty in December, the idea for another department for City Hall, get out of City Hall and go down there, you know, I think that's a great idea. I'm looking forward to trying to figure out how to work and getting this done quickly. I mean, City Hall, I just can't imagine anybody being able to work there, just like you were saying. It's awful. And the police department is awful. And we shouldn't, this town shouldn't be living like this with these buildings. We have to do it now and not 5 years from now. Now. So let's get to work.
Thank you. I did not go on the tour. I was out of town, but I have been in a lot of the buildings, and I've heard from a lot of people in the past on the shape of the buildings. I do believe that a lot of what the committee's work is more of a macro view of the facilities, and will rely on a lot of baseline data and information from consultants as well. I think I would leave it to the city manager and staff at this point if there are short-term solutions to certain things. I'm sure they're well aware of the conditions of, you know, the facilities. They're living in them every day. So, and I don't think that what we end up proposing to City Council is, I mean, there may be some things that can be fixed on a short-term basis, but I would imagine city management is already looking into all those short-term near-term solutions. And what we're trying to help the city resolve is a longer-term view, and something that's going to take time and financing, and depending on how we finance it, it may be financed out of, operating budgets, which would extend it, and if it ends up somewhat being financed out of parcel tax, on property tax, then that's another way to go, which could make things happen faster. But you can't, I hear it. I agree. These things need to be fixed, but you can't just all of a sudden magically create a new police station with, women's locker rooms and male locker rooms and better jail facilities. So I do believe we all have to be sort of patiently going through the process. I think the process is important to get and hearing what the community has to say as well, not just what our opinions are. But I would imagine the community is probably going to agree with just about everything that's been said here, so far tonight. So that was all great information, and going forward, we'll have to take all that into account and come out the other side of this thing and see where it all lands. So with that, we'll move on to an important area, which is the budget and financial overview. I think you're going to be going through the long-term financial forecast that was built back in February 2015?
Yes.
Okay. How do you want to do this? You want to go through the whole thing and then we can ask our questions later, or do you want it to be back and forth?
It is completely up to the committee. If it's easier for you to just be able to dialogue during the presentation,
Okay.
I am good with that.
We'll try not to interrupt you too many times, but maybe as things come up, it may be easier to deal with them as they show up on the slide. That'd be great. And I'm not expecting you to have answers to all the questions off the top of your head, and I'm sure there'll be a bit of work to come back to us with in the future.
Yes, I appreciate that. And also, Allison is taking notes on the questions that we don't have the immediate answers for. And on December 13th, for the SHAPE Committee, we will be talking about the fiscal health analysis that we'll be presenting to. It will be presented to City Council on the 12th. It should actually be published this Friday with the agenda, and then it will come to the SHAPE Committee on the 13th. So that's a good opportunity for us to be able to respond to some of the questions we don't have the answers for tonight. And it also, the fiscal health analysis will also give a little more detail as far as the financials go. So I wanted to start out to talk about government finance a little bit. Government finance is a different beast than the private sector. So there's three main documents that I want to have for, and this is also in the PowerPoint presentations. Everyone has copies in front of them. Three main documents that are my source documents for tonight. The first is our annual budget. I do have 3 copies up here if people want to share them on the dais, as well as copies of our annual audit. So this is what our annual budget looks like. It is published every year, and this is city staff's guidebook on what council has authorized us to spend in any fiscal year. We cannot spend more than has actually been authorized in this budget without getting city council approval. So that's one of the source documents that I'll be referring to. The second source document is the primer on California city revenues. That was included in each of your SHAPE binder. It is put out by the League of California Cities. It is a great tool, resource, overview of how city revenues work. In particular, and this is definitely can get a little confusing, especially when you look at the audited financial numbers, is the difference between restricted versus unrestricted revenues. Just because you might see a dollar amount in the CAFR that says this is your total fund balance, typically a big portion of it is restricted, so we cannot use it for general fund purposes. And so I wanted to just clarify that with everyone, because I know I have heard before that, oh no, it shows you have $20 million. 10 million of that is actually, approximately 10 million is actually restricted. So there is a difference between restricted and unrestricted. The other thing that I wanted to talk about that the California City Revenues Primer does talk about is sales tax. Currently, right now, for the city of St. Helena, our sales tax is 8.25%. The city does not receive 8.25% of all sales tax. We receive 1% in the sales tax, and then thank you to the passage of Measure D, we also receive an extra 0.5% sales tax. So currently the city of St. Helena does receive 1.5% of that 8.25% sales tax, and the primer gives you an overview of where typically the other portion of that sales tax goes to. The third item, the source document, is our comprehensive annual financial report, or what we refer to as the CAFR. The CAFR is an unbiased audited report that comes out every year. We hire an independent third party to audit our financials. Within the CAFR, there are two different types of financial statements. So you'll see one is for the proprietary funds or the enterprise funds. That is our water and wastewater systems. When you look at those financial statements, those financial statements will mirror the financial statements of the private sector. So you'll see those financial statements. If you work for the private sector, you'll see similarities. That is in contrast to our governmental activities. So the governmental activities, those balance sheets do not look, they're a little similar, but they're not exactly as the enterprise funds, so you cannot compare apples to apples. Some of them require, the enterprise funds might require reporting on certain categories, where the governmental funds require you to report on different activities. So when you see the two different items in the CAFR, I just want to kind of make that distinction for you. And I actually do have enough extra CAFRs if everybody wants to take a copy of our 16 audited financials. Our 17 audited financials, we should be able to get the printed copies sometime in January this year. So there are some differentiations. The other thing to remember, too, in the governmental activities, you will see governmental activities. Governmental activities does not mean general fund. Governmental activities will talk about general fund. It will also talk about all of your impact fee funds. So it's several different funds that are rolled up into each other, and that's where you see the difference between your restricted versus unrestricted. Your impact fees, those are restricted funds. We cannot use those for whatever we want. They can only be used for what is designated in our impact fee reports that were accepted by City Council. Where general fund, those are the unrestricted ones. So that's a good differentiation, just to make sure. And if you have any questions on the language or anything, definitely feel free to email Mark. I believe all questions are going to be funneled through Mark, and then they'll come over to us, because it is very confusing, because you're dealing with two different types of financial statements. You're dealing with very complex things within each financial statement. Every year when we do the audit, I literally have to reacquaint myself with both sets of financial statements. So those are the three main source documents. Any questions on the source documents?
I wouldn't mind making one comment, because you made the comment about sales tax, and then we only get 1.5% out of the 8.25%. I mean, relative. But property taxes also is, because everybody hears about property taxes and they see somebody go build a $5 million house or $20 million house, and they go, oh, 1.02% or whatever, and gee, we're going to get, we only get about, 1/20th or 1/25th of whatever the property tax assessment is. So that's just for everybody, when they see somebody go off and build something, and it doesn't mean the city's also going to have some windfall in property tax revenue.
That is correct. So the next item I want to take, it's a great segue, thank you, Mark, is talk about general fund revenues. Our general fund revenues, they're broken down into several categories. We are, at this point, this is the second year we've actually aligned, or sorry, the first year we've aligned the general fund revenue categories. We've aligned what the CAFR, how the CAFR is mandated to report it, and we've aligned what is in the budget. So we're trying to make it as easy as possible for people to understand the two documents. Our general fund revenue categories are property tax, our sales tax, transient occupancy tax, or TOT, so that's on hotels on short-term stays, other taxes, license and permits, fines and forfeits, intergovernmental, interest and rents, and charges for miscellaneous services. The top three where we receive most of our general fund revenues are property tax, sales tax, and TOT. Oh, that didn't come out right. So you definitely want to refer to your chart.
You want one?
Well, I'll steal one from Mark. For some reason, it lost the formatting on this page, but on your chart, it will show you what the breakdown is. So on the far right, the blue column, or the blue part of the pie, that is our total general fund revenues this year is estimated to be $13.3 million. If you look at the budget document, this is slightly higher than what the budget document says, because we've had some revisions since we published the budget and since the budget was approved. It's a good thing. It's about $200,000 higher than what we initially expected. So property taxes, out of that $13.3 million, property taxes account for 34% of our revenues. Sales tax, which is the orange pie, is 22%. Measure D, we're accounting for Measure D separately than the sales tax, so we can see exactly how much comes in from Measure D. Measure D is 11%. So if you look at total sales tax, you want to combine the sales and Measure D, so you're about 33% of your general fund revenues is from sales tax. TOT is 21%, and then the little dark blue section, that is your other revenue categories, and that is only 13%. So you can really see where property sales and TOT take up the majority of the revenues that we receive here in the city. Some of the general fund revenue assumptions that were made for fiscal year 18. Every year we do our revenue assumptions, and when we present it to council, we present what our assumptions are. Property tax increase, our initial assumption was 3% because that is based on the maximum amount allowed by law to be able to increase property taxes. The initial was 3%. We received the actual numbers from the county in August, and the actuals, the updated numbers is actually 6.56%. The difference between the 3% and the 6.56% has to do with resale of property, so homes that have been, the valuation has changed because maybe it was purchased for $500,000, it was sold for $1 million, so the property valuation goes up that $500,000. So it's revaluation of property due to sales, as well as revaluation of property due to people making home improvements. So if somebody buys a house or does substantial improvements on their home, it will increase the valuation of the home, so that's why that's increased to 6.56%. Our sales tax increase...
Is that 6.5, is that in this fiscal year 18 revenue number here that's been updated for this?
That is correct.
Okay.
That is correct. Sales tax increase, it was based on 1.9%. The city does contract with Muni Services to provide their sales tax forecast and updates to us. So we feel really good about the numbers they give us. They're pretty accurate. We do meet with our reps from Muni Services several times a year, and they will consistently give us updates on how we're doing. In addition to the sales tax increase of 1.9%, Measure D, we did factor in $1.4 million for Measure D revenues for this fiscal year. Transient occupancy tax, we factored in a 1% increase, as well as we factored in Los Alcobas at a 50% occupancy for the first year, knowing it might be a slow ramp up. I just looked at it's confidential information, but I did look at the numbers for Los Alcobas, and it looks like we're actually coming in higher than what we projected at the 50% occupancy, and those numbers are also reflected in the increase. Measure D, just a little bit about Measure D. It is a general tax of 0.5 cent, and so general tax means it goes right into the general fund, and it can be used for any general fund purposes. It is estimated, again, for income for fiscal year 18 is going to be $1.4 million, and there is no sunset on Measure D, meaning that there is no time that Measure D is going to expire. City Council, when they voted to put Measure D through, it was without a sunset clause on it, so that will be revenue that we will continually get. So here's a quick synopsis of your general fund revenues, your top three, and I'm really glad these numbers showed up on this chart because that would have been a lot of numbers to read off. So you'll see the very bottom line, which is the blue. This is an aggregate for what's happened between fiscal years 12 to fiscal year 18. And if anybody doesn't know about our fiscal years, fiscal year for the city of St. Helena runs from July 1st to June 30th each year. So when you hear us refer to fiscal years, it's a July to June. So you'll see the very bottom line in the blue, those are your property taxes. So you can see between fiscal year 12 going to fiscal year 18, we've had a slow increase in our property taxes. The orange line is our sales tax. We've remained pretty consistent in our sales tax. You'll see a little bit of a spike in fiscal year 16, and that is because, a little bit of a decrease in fiscal year 17 for your sales tax. That was because of the ending of a triple flip, which was a very wonky, crazy formula that the state of California came up with 12 years ago, 15 years ago, to be able to get more money from the cities. So that's why you see a slight decrease in it. It was because of final payment for the triple flip. The next sliver on the gray, you'll only see that in fiscal year 17 and 18 because those are your Measure D funds. And then the orange-yellow line at the top is your TOT. So you do see that we have been steadily increasing our TOTs, and the spike in fiscal year 18 is due to the opening of Los Alcobas. Any questions on the top three? And you can see the top mark being the $13 million. our general fund revenues are a little over 13.3 million for this fiscal year. So you can definitely see the trends on how much these 3 funding sources mean to the city's general fund. On the contrast, we want to look at our general fund expenses. So these are the trends between fiscal years 12 and fiscal year 18. So you can see that we have been trending up. We did have a decrease in fiscal year 16, and that was due to just funding requirements. So our expenses that we projected weren't going to be enough to cover our revenues that we were projecting to come in was not going to be enough to cover our expenses, so we did have to make some cuts that year. And then it trended up last year, and then this year it's at the $13.1 million. And the difference is also the additional revenue we received for Los Alcabas, for Measure D, as well as our expenses. Those additional expenses have allowed us to be able to put some money into, for 2 years for fiscal year 18 and 19, $800,000 in each year to go towards Upper York Creek Dam removal, as well as it has allowed us to put a little bit of money into our capital asset, basically into our capital assets, where we can do a little more repairs on roads. We can put a little more money in a fund for replacement of vehicles. So it allowed us to be able to do that. So that's why you see the jump this year.
So when you say expenses, for most of us laypersons, that doesn't necessarily mean money that's leaving the checkbook, because you might be allocating it to some other, you're building up a reserve for some other funding sources.
This is actually expenses, so it's transferring money out of the general
Right,
fund.
I know the 800 was, yeah.
Yeah, it's transferring money out of the general fund for the $800,000 into the water fund.
Right, in the roads, okay.
For the road and ADA, I know there's some for road repair ADA, that gets
Right.
transferred into our capital improvement funds, which the money will be spent. So they are actual expenses, just transfers to other funds.
Thanks.
Here is our final budget summary. This is something that we do present every year at the budget and at mid-year. These, again, are very updated numbers. We had some really positive information based on our unaudited financials for fiscal year 17. So currently, right now, when we presented to City Council for the budget, we're expecting our net position percentage at the very bottom to be right at 25%. That is City Council's unofficial goal, is to be at a 25% of reserves. We are now actually at 34%. The combination of the ending fund balance, we were initially estimating our ending fund balance was going to be right around $3.3 million, $3.2 million. We are actually up to $4 million. There's been several factors for this. One of them is our revenues did come in higher than we expected, than what we anticipated and budgeted for. Our expenses came in lower. Our departments did extremely well in actually managing their finances, not making, even though they budgeted for the expenses, sometimes they weren't able to make them. The winter storms last year was a perfect example. A lot of the items that our Public Works Department was planning on doing, they couldn't do because of the floods, and they were responding as opposed to actually being proactive. And the other difference is we are aligning the ending fund balance with what is in the CAFR. So the ending fund balance that we used to report did not include any fund balance that we had in our recreation fund, in our fireworks fund, our 4th of July fund. Those are technically general fund revenues. We did not account for that before. We are actually starting to account for this, so it will match up with what we have in the CAFR, so everything will align better. But the bottom line on this is we now are expecting our net possession at the end of this fiscal year to be at 34%, which is a lot healthier than what we initially expected.
Is there a 200,000 missing from the fourth line there? Looks like line 2 minus line 3 should be 224.
Yes, there is a 2. Thank you very much. That is missing.
Figure at the bottom looks to be correct. It's just our position was better last year than you're even showing here.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Yes, you're absolutely correct. There should be an extra number in there. My apologies.
So that should be 224.
224. I'm trying to do the math in my head, but yes, there's definitely a number missing. Thank you, Tim. So now I want to talk, were there any other questions?
Sorry, just a quick one. Can you talk about the ending fund balance and where those funds end up on the income statement or the balance sheet? That the $4 million, 4.2?
The 4.2 million in the CAFR I do not have the page number on me. Oh, yes, I actually do. So page 17 of the CAFR, here, if If we want to pass out CAFRs and everyone can take a look at it. And just so you know, the number I have here is in the 17 CAFR, and I'm referring to the 16 CAFR, but it'll at least give you an idea of where that number comes from. So page 17. And this is great reading if you want to take it home. Insomniacs, it's wonderful. I don't know, Doug promised he was going to bring me a coffee for the next meeting, just saying. So calling you out on that one. Sir. Right here. I can share.
Take this, I'll share with Pat.
Okay, so on page 17 of the CAFR, you'll see this is the balance sheet for the governmental funds. At the very far left-hand column, it says general fund. Here you can see what wraps up the governmental funds. It's a general fund, Measure A fund. There's non-major governmental funds, so then your total governmental funds. We're just looking at the general fund column right now. You'll see almost towards the very bottom, it says total fund balance is $4.452 million right there. So the unrestricted, the amount that the city council has discretion to spend is basically the assigned and the unassigned. So right above it, you'll see the $171,000 and then almost the $3.3 million. Those two numbers combined is what is going to give us our beginning fund balance or our end fund balance. Just know these numbers aren't going to line up because the CAFR that you have in front of you is fiscal year 16. The numbers that are on the screen are for fiscal year 17, which haven't been published yet. Does that help? Okay.
I have a question. Do I have to bring the mic? Yeah. This remaining balance, that's 34%. This is like your backup in case everything goes bust?
Yes, that is correct. It's like it's unrestricted, or we always try to strive to about 25%. That's council's unofficial goal on it, and it is just in case something happens. We're not pulling all of our accounts down to zero. We're not pulling the general fund down to zero. So we have a little bit of money just in case something happens that we need to cover.
Okay, so then just two more questions. One is there a history of cities going bust and running out of this money in California?
There's been a few that have been in bankruptcy. Mark. Wow, Mark left? Okay. I believe Stockton was one. San Bernardino was in bankruptcy protection. County of Orange County.
Vallejo did.
Yeah, Vallejo.
I mean, some of the cities really ran into significant problems because they have unfunded pension liabilities. That's where a lot of them had problems. They had fire departments that had unfunded pension liabilities, or police departments. And they were larger cities than ours. But that it does happen. But it's a good question, because I think if you look at historical information, the question is, how much of a reserve do you need for what is the revenue risks that you have, or expense things that may show up. But I think those high-risk expense areas are more in the enterprise funds, like if something happened with the dam, but it isn't part of this. But if you did have a big, lawsuit that cost you a lot in legal expenses, so you'd want to have something for that. I think if you look during the recession that the most recent recession we had, I think, sales tax revenues dropped by about $500,000, and I think property tax revenues went down, or TOT went down by about $500,000. I mean, so you have to have something. It's a rainy day fund, basically, is what it is.
Okay, and the last question is there a mandate by the state that you have to have a certain reserve?
There is not a mandate, just good government accounting is that you
Just
do set a reserve.
accounting.
Yeah, and it is up to the council purview. We've always had an unofficial 25%. I know there has been talks about potentially raising it, because if something catastrophic does happen, let's say you have a large sinkhole, you have something that our street funds don't have enough money to pay for it. So it is very prudent and is very good financial and government accounting to actually have a reserve.
Okay, thanks.
I have a question. Over the last couple of years, I've heard, frequent discussion about the overcharges that were made to the state and to the federal government on, I think it was flood control projects. I'm not aware that there's actually been a dollar value assigned to that. Is there one, and how is that reflected in any of our budget reports?
Are you referring to our comprehensive flood control project that we did within the city?
I'm referring to some overcharges or double charges that we made, and we ended up with some obligations, to, I believe, to the state and federal government. I just want to know if we know what that final settlement number was and how it's reflected anywhere here. In other words, we're showing $4 million, but do we owe $2 million to someone else that we're paying over time, or some other settlement?
Okay. I can address that a little bit. I have a slide on that later in the presentation. Just so you know, the short answer is we had to do a FEMA payback, which I believe everybody's pretty well aware of $1.9 million. That number's ingrained in my head. $1.6 million of it did come from the general fund. That has already been taken care of. That's done. So these numbers include what was paid back, and I believe that was 3 years ago, almost 4 years ago now, that was paid back. The double charges that you were referring to had to do with money received from Department of Water Resources as well as money received from the State Revolving Fund. Department of Water Resources, that was a grant, so all of everything that the expenses that we charged to them, those were all good expenses, and they're all auditable. State revolving fund loan, those were the double charges. State revolving fund loan, we did get the money, but that is a loan, so we have to pay it back. So that's part of our just regular SRF payback, which is addressed in our debt service slides.
Thank you.
Can I just ask, every time we hire a new employee, do we do projections on what the city's going to owe for the term that they might work for the city in terms of their pensions, so that we have some idea as we're increasing the employees in the city where we're going to be in 15 years, so we don't run into the same kinds of problems that bigger cities have run into?
Yes, that is part of the projections that we have. A few years ago, because of some of the conditions that PERS had and what's known as unfunded liabilities, and I didn't have a chance to find it. I just recently read an article, and I believe it was from the Government Finance Officers Association or League of California Cities. I can't remember which one. They had a really good article on unfunded liabilities that explained it in very, very simple terms, and I actually appreciated the article. So every city that is part of PERS is facing unfunded liabilities. Years ago, they updated PERS systems, so now what we have is also the CalPERA. Is that? No. PEPRA, thank you. My words failed me. They have PEPRA. So with the PEPRA employees, so new employees that come in who have not actually worked for a government entity before and are not part of the PERS system, they are now under a new system. There are not unfunded liabilities for those entities. So our unfunded liabilities are based on all of our employees that are still in the PERS systems. We do get updated numbers for our unfunded liabilities every year. We are looking at hiring a consultant that will actually do our actuaries and project it out how much. Right now, we do spend about $500,000, between $500,000 and $600,000 a year on unfunded liabilities for our PERS system. So it still is a big concern of our city as well as other cities. So that is something that we are going to be working on getting actuaries for that run.
And as we do that, is the idea that we'll then put aside money for that in addition to the reserve fund, so that we know that we're going to be able to cover this in years to come?
That I don't have right now. We're paying it for it out of our operations budget, and I believe our city manager would like to make a comment.
Just a couple of thoughts on that. A couple of observations. One, we have no retired firefighters in this city, which is an incredible distinction with a lot of other agencies in California that have retired annuitants, and these are public safety officers that have a much more lucrative formula, pension formula. And in some cases, agencies are paying closer to 50% of salary, base salary today, just to keep the pensions fund solvent. In our case, we pay zero for the firefighters because we've operated with volunteers and part-time. So that's an incredible distinction, an incredible competitive advantage for this community. And I think it would be helpful perhaps to share with the committee the percentage of base salary for our miscellaneous public safety and the PEPRAs. I think if I'm accurate, the PEPRA employees cost us about 7% of salary. I think it's about 7%. Our miscellaneous I believe, is in the 15% to 20% of base salary, and our public safety officers are in the 30 to 35%. Some cities and public agencies, those numbers are a little higher, but ours are pretty on par with the averages that you see across the board, and it all deals with the pension formula that is attributed to them. So from a pension standpoint, we're actually in pretty good shape relative to other communities.
I hate to drag this one along, but so do we actually have an unfunded liability to CalPERS, or do we have to fund based on what the requested funding levels are?
We have unfunded liability that we do pay into them every year, so they let us know what it is every year. That's why we want to run the actuaries on it, so we can actually start planning ahead for the future. But we do pay every year, and if you look at our budget, this is the first year in our budget. Before, there's a line for PERS. I think it says employer PERS.
Yeah.
There's a line item in our budget for it. This year, we actually broke it up into employer PERS and PERS unfunded liability. So you can look in the budget and see exactly how much we're paying for unfunded liability, and we can run a quick report on it.
Yeah. Thank you.
Ready to move to the next? I know you guys like the slide so much. So the next item that I just want to talk a little bit about is your general fund fixed costs. The reason I've added the slide is when we do the fiscal health diagnostic, when you see that document, this is something that is included in there, so I wanted to at least make everyone familiar with what that is. Our general fund fixed costs that we have right now, our known fixed costs, is one is our debt service. We know it's coming up. We know what the debt service is. We are very fortunate. Our general fund liability for our fixed costs is actually fairly low. We have our labor costs. Those are fixed costs. We know what we have to pay our employees. We have that. And the third one is a maintenance of effort, or an MOE. This is something that is new, that it's coming up with our Measure T, so it's our transportation tax that we will start. So once Measure A, which funded part of the flood control project, once that sunsets, Measure T goes right into place for the exact same dollar amount. We will start seeing Measure T money in fiscal year 19. Part of Measure T is we are required to have a maintenance of effort, which is something that will hit the general fund. So the first fixed cost is I want you to know about is the debt service. So right now we have 4 different fixed costs for our debt service that do affect our general fund. The first is the Adams Street property. Currently, we have a balance of $344,000 on that property. We have an annual payment of $77,000, and that payment carries us through fiscal year 2021. So we're almost done paying that off. The fire station property, we had 2 different debts on this property. One was through general obligation bonds, which is a GO bond. That was set up in a different fund. It was added to the property taxes. That has been paid off. The other debt that we have on that is actually on the property itself, and that was general fund funded. That is at $93,891 is what our annual debt service is. The final payment is in this fiscal year, so that will actually free up almost $100,000 in the general fund. And the last one is the state revolving fund, or the SRF loan, and this is tied with the flood control project. For this fiscal year, there's a balance of $5.5, almost $5.6 million for the SRF loan. Measure A funds were used as a guarantee for this loan. We are expecting, once Measure A is done and over with, we will have approximately $4.3 million that will go from Measure A to paying off the SRF loan. So that will leave a balance of $1.2 million for SRF. The annual payments on it are $526,000 per year. Part of the agreement that we did have with state revolving fund loan is as we get money in to pay it off, we have to pay it off immediately. So when we look at the Measure A funds, as soon as we can do the drawdown in Measure A, which we're expecting is going to be this fiscal year, that money will have to go right directly into, literally turn it right back around into the state revolving fund loan. So that means the remaining balance of that $1.2 million, again, this is approximate. Sales tax are higher, we'll have more money for Measure A. If they're lower, we'll have less money for it. We are estimating right now of a balance of $1.2 million that will have to come from the general fund to pay off the SRF loan, and that would be for the payments for fiscal year 19 and then 20 and any residual in 21. Again, that will fluctuate. We will know at the end of the fiscal year how much we will actually have based on what the actual revenues coming in are. The second fixed cost that we have is our labor costs. So I did a quick chart for everyone to see.
Can I ask a question real quick?
Absolutely.
I know we paid off the general obligation bonds for the firehouse. Did that happen in fiscal year 17, or when did that happen?
That was fiscal year, I want to say fiscal year 17, we had one final payment on it.
Right.
We do have a little bit of residual in that fund. It's called the Go Bond Fund, so if you look in the back of the CAFR,
Right.
you'll see that there is some residual. The bond language does allow us to be able to use that funding for maintenance of that facility as well. So the residual that we have there, we are planning on using it for any of the updated maintenance that we need for that facility.
So there won't be, so that doesn't show up in anybody's property tax bill anymore?
It will not.
Right. So everybody's paying less property taxes?
Yes.
Okay.
Can I just ask a quick question about the reserve fund, backing up just a little bit? Is that tied in, do we have to have a minimum that we have to keep in a reserve fund to be able to issue bonds, and so that we can borrow money, the city can borrow money?
That would be dependent on the debt ratio and what debt ratios the city council would like to set. I don't have a particular dollar amount or a percentage right now.
But we would be safe to raise some money by borrowing it at this point? Is that the...
Well, going back to the question on optimum fund balance, I mean, cities have numbers anywhere from, negative zero, under zero, to 100% of general fund annual operating budgets. The guide you're going to see published on Friday, which is this health diagnostic tool, references a 15 to 20% recommended fund balance, and the city council's policy has been 25%. So our ambition is to stay north of that, and the farther north we get, the easier borrowing will be.
And then, so retiring a couple of these loans that we have now on the fire station in Adams Street would be combined with a higher than normal reserve fund, would make it maybe logical to be able to borrow money to replace or rebuild something like a city hall. There.
Okay, so the next slide is the fixed cost for labor, and again, this is just for the general fund. I did an analysis of 3 years, so you could see what our labor costs are. So fiscal year 16, fiscal year 17, and fiscal year 18. And then the column over to the right will give you an idea of our total general fund expenses. Our labor costs for fiscal year 16 for the general fund was 61%. Fiscal year 17 was 61%, and then for fiscal year 18, it is 57%. Again, this is a labor cost just as compared to the general fund. If you actually look at our total, all of our funds in the budget document, it's right around 47%, usually right around 47%, if you take all funds into consideration to pay for salary and benefits. But those are fixed costs, and traditionally your labor costs is one of the highest costs that a city is going to incur that's fixed.
Do you have the FTE numbers for those 3 years?
The only number I have in front of me would be fiscal year 18. And the FTE, actually, I do have the historical. Let me get my better glasses on. So fiscal year 16 FTE was 70.17, fiscal year 16-17 was 74.54, and fiscal year 17-18 is 77.9. 77.9 is the FTE. And there was a little spike in the year that we actually changed the firefighters to volunteer to part-time.
Okay.
And that accounts for the 74?
Yes. I don't have those in front of me.
April, these amounts are wages and benefits?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, it's salary and benefits.
And when we say they're fixed, I mean, they're kind of semi-fixed, right? I mean,
so we could eliminate positions. We could, but as far as the personnel that we have on hand, these are the fixed costs. The increase in costs are primarily due to increase in regular step increases, increase the costs for pension liabilities, increase the costs for health care benefits. So those are all factored in. And so this is total package salary and benefits. I'll leave it up to Mark.
I'm sorry, what? At the end, it's not on the agenda, but I'm going to open it up for public comment at the end as well.
I've got a quick question. Talking about the FTEs, could we at some point get a breakdown of budgeted positions by department?
It is actually in the budget document. So if you look on the budget document, the current year budget, fiscal year 18, it's on page 12 of the budget document. I have 3 copies of the budget here. It's also available online. And Allison said she could also drop it in the Dropbox for everybody, but it is in the budget.
Yeah, that'd be great if Allison could drop it in the Dropbox. That'd be perfect.
It'd be interesting to see a calculation of consultants, of which we have many, somehow factored into labor costs, because they are labor. And I know that they're not employees and they don't have benefits and all that, but I think that'll give us a clearer picture of what we actually spend for labor.
What was the question?
One other quick question.
So it was if I understood it correctly, Pat, it was just factoring in someplace the costs that we spend on consultant for professional contracts. We do have 2 line items in the budget, which is professional contracts and professional services. It is something we can run a report on, and we can potentially layer it on top of it. It wouldn't, because of how it's categorized in the budget, it wouldn't show up in our normal salary and benefits, but we could layer it. I believe, Stan, you had another question?
Which report is equivalent to the private sector profit and loss statement in the annual financial report? Is that the statement of activities?
It is. Let me look up the name of it. I believe so, because the balance sheet is for, you know,
I think it's page 19, right, where you have revenues and expenditures, and it comes down to fund balance at the end of the year. Statement of revenues, expenditures, and changes in fund balances.
that one is for governmental activity, so that doesn't include the enterprise funds. And so
Well, but I don't think, okay, I don't know that it'd be right to include the enterprise funds, the water and wastewater funds.
No.
I think we're talking about the general fund.
We are. I think Stan was just asking where it was reflected in there. So what you'll see is on page 20 and 21 and 22 at the top where it says proprietary funds. Proprietary funds equate to enterprise funds, which is water, wastewater. So it'd be anything on the proprietary funds.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Hey, Stan, just so I understand, I thought you were asking for what's the equivalent of an income statement for a business.
Yeah, it looks like it's page 19.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
Yeah,
Oh, I'm sorry.
I think that's what he's looking for.
Yes, you're correct. I'm sorry about that. So, okay. The last fixed costs that I wanted to just make you aware of is the Measure T. Again, Measure T, what that will do is as soon as Measure A sunsets, Measure T goes into effect. It is a 0.5% sales tax. For the city of St. Helena, we are estimating to get about $600,000 per year from Measure T, and that is to go towards roads maintenance, anything to do with streets. Our maintenance of effort that we are required to do, where general fund has to pay every year for the duration of Measure T, our maintenance of effort is $379,189 per year from the general fund. So that is a transfer that you will see for the entire duration of Measure T from the general fund. It will be transferred over to our CIP Streets Fund. And I wanted to just make you aware of that because that is something that it is a fixed cost. It is something that is required for us to do. And that dollar amount was based on the actual amounts that the city transferred for streets out of the general fund during fiscal years 8, 9, and 10. It takes the average of those 3 years. So that's where they came up with their maintenance of effort that is required for Measure T funds, and that is definitely countywide. Every city had to use the same numbers for it. So that is just another factor for costs for what is from the general fund that has to be transferred over. And also knowing the past couple of years, we have not been able to transfer too much over into streets, so this is an additional cost that we're going to have.
So just so I'm clear then, so we're going to get $600,000 a year, and we're going to use from our own pockets $379,189 per year to go into that. So we've got almost $1 million that we're going to spend on roads in the next, starting in 19, right?
Yes, it's
That's
starting
pretty good.
fiscal year 19, and
Look
it's
at these
for
roads
25
fixed, so
years.
that's good.
I believe it's 25 years, correct?
It's a 25-year term, but if you note the numbers that we shared with you earlier related to Measure D, it's the same equivalent half-cent sales tax figure. That half-cent sales tax Measure D generates $1.4 million. So due to methodology of Measure T, we are a donor city with a revenue stream of $600,000, meaning we donate probably about $800,000 to the county, and via the methodology to the other cities in the county.
So the next slide, this talks a little bit about our facility maintenance. Very appropriate after you saw our city, had our city tour here. So when we do facility maintenance, it primarily comes from two funds. If there's any significant maintenance that's being done, it is run through our civic fund, which is Fund 773. So you'll see the blue line is how much we spent out of Fund 773 for facilities maintenance from fiscal year 12 to fiscal year 18. And then the orange line is what we spent out of our operating fund. So if you look in the budget under the Public Works Department, fund number, it's 101, account number 101-5006. 5006 is our government buildings. So what I did is I took the numbers that were allocated, that were actually spent in our government buildings operation budget for fiscal years 12 through 18. I subtracted out any salary and benefits, so you really got the cost of what we had spent to maintain our buildings. So you can definitely see where the trends are in fiscal year 12, about 400,000. 13 about 400, 14 and 15 we spiked up to a little over $1 million, a little under $1 million. Most of that is primarily due to the HVAC system that we did put into the library. And then fiscal year 16, 17, and 18, you can see considerable drops of any major improvements that we did to our facilities out of our civic improvement fund, and you can see it really was just out of our operations fund, and it was pretty much just lack of a better term, duct tape, just to get it to where it is functionable and where it was paid for out of our operations budget as opposed to out of our civic impact, our civic fund. So I kind of wanted to give you an overview of our facility maintenance and where we were strong, and you can see we definitely have not been able to put that much money into our buildings over the past couple of years.
I have a couple questions. Is Fund 773 without money?
I would have to look to see what the fund balance is in.
Because we see all these maintenance things that need to be done and they haven't been done. And so that's why I'm wondering, is that fund depleted? And I guess we won't know what it might cost to repair all those things until we get the proposal from a contractor, right?
Correct. And I don't have Fund 773 in front of me right now. Fund 773 is part of our CIP, our Capital Improvement Project budget, so I can look up those numbers and find out for you. There isn't a whole lot in there, and this is just general fund. This does not take into account water, wastewater, or any of the other funds. So this
No, I didn't think so, but I'm just talking about all the things we observed when we walked around and looked at the buildings.
Yeah, I would have to look. I'd have to refer back to the CIP project, and I can get back to you on that.
Okay.
'Cause
Was there a conscious decision by the city council to cut funding to that fund, to the civic fund, and that's why this has dropped so extraordinarily over these last 16, 17, and 18?
we didn't have the funds available to be able to do the transfers on it without doing cuts to other services. No.
And just another comment, if we had moved this chart another 5 years back, what you would see is revenues starting to decline around 2007, 2008, and just bottoming out. And in every city in California, this city went on a furlough. Other agencies I've worked for went on furloughs. Maintenance budgets were cut to basically zero. Travel budgets were cut to zero. Training was cut to zero. And so we suffered through an incredible deep recession between 9-10 through really 12-13 before the revenues really started climbing again. And so it wouldn't be surprising to me if we looked back 5 more years that the numbers were even lower than 400,000.
And as a response to Pat's question, in the budget document, and in the back of the budget document, you have your summary of your other funds. So Fund 77, oh, you know what, my apologies, it is not in here. I thought it was. So my apologies, it's not. I will have to get it for the next meeting for you.
Just so I have it straight, so 773 or whatever it was, that's not a restricted fund.
It is not a restricted fund. It is one of our capital improvement project funds. So
Right, but
some of
but it's not restricted. So
some of the
when-
funds in there are restricted because they might have been transferred in from impact fee funds, which those funds are restricted. So it's
But if they were transferred in from impact fees, wouldn't you have then immediately wouldn't you have spent those monies on a short-term basis? So really, I mean, whatever's in 773, I mean, except for maybe a timing difference between fiscal
Yep.
years, there really wouldn't be a lot of restricted
Correct.
funds.
It's correct. So the CIP funds, they are tied to the CIP budget that's adopted by City Council every year. So City Council does have the discretion, let's say the CIP budget for civic impact or for civic improvements designated one particular project and another project came up. City Council could, at their discretion, could actually transfer it to a different civic project or unencumber it from Fund 773. That is
Right,
correct.
okay. So what I wanted to make sure I understood properly. So on page, I don't know, there's not a page number, but anyway, where you had final budget summary and it had the ending fund balance at the beginning of the year of $4.2 million, that would have included the 773 funds, assuming that wasn't anything for the impact funds.
No, it
Right?
does not include that.
It does not.
Does not include the.
So can we get a listing of all the fund balances that exist that are not restricted funds? Because technically they're available to be moved from one fund to another fund if the city council so desired. So then potentially our reserve is higher.
Correct. Correct. Yes, I can get a copy of that, and also when we present the CAF for that information.
Yeah, we can just have a listing of here's all the various fund balances that are unrestricted, and so we have a total of, okay.
But the way money gets into that fund, 773, I assume is that at the time you do the budget,
Transfer monies.
the department that controls that, is that Public Works,
Yes.
would have to issue a request through you to the city council to increase the amount of money in that fund. Is that right?
That is correct.
And did that happen last year?
Yes. Yes. So in the budget
And yet
document-
it's still very tiny.
Well, not all of it. So if you look in fiscal year 18, the amount that we transferred to facility maintenance, it was, let me find it in the budget.
Looks like under 400,000. Oh, no, that's the entire thing, yeah.
So the amount that was transferred in the budget this year to Fund 7 to, oh, no, you're correct. We did not 773. Oh, you know, I think that should be 733. My apologies, that's a typo on there. I believe it should be Fund 733. And the amounts that we transferred over there this fiscal year was $80,000 for the ADA transition for facilities and $45,000 for ADA transition curb ramps. And that was the only amount that's being transferred from general fund. So that would be the little blue line. And then the orange line is just our operations budget out of general fund. So my apologies, that should say Fund 733, not 773. Any other questions on the facilities?
I kind of remember Jennifer Phillips telling me that the HVAC was like 750,000 or something like that.
I don't know the number off the top of my head. It was, I want to say it was almost a little more than that.
And that would reveal itself in the big spike in 14 and 15.
That would be the blue.
So I guess I'm just trying to get a sense of weights here, apples and oranges, where that's just one air conditioning system out of 12 buildings, and it's such a huge number, it just makes everything else just look like a paltry amount of money to operate with and fix stuff. No?
As far as the spike in 14 and 15?
Well, it's just that this one big spike just comes from an air conditioning system in one building. Kind of makes everything else look like, well, geez, what? Looks kind of like a lot of duct tape here. And just one more thing, I mean, there's a presumption of a kind of dark cloud in the horizon that every 10 years we have a recession, and we're overdue.
We are.
Okay, thanks.
Yes.
How do you decide between whether you spend money from Fund 733 during the year or the operating fund?
Operating fund is usually your day-to-day thing. So it's the small dollar items. Maybe we need to replace some of the carpeting. Once we move it over to the Fund 733, so when we move it over to the Capital Improvement Fund, typically at that point it increases the value of the asset so we can actually capitalize that asset. So that's kind of the big difference between when something moves over to the CIP fund as opposed to just operating. When you look at the operating budget for government buildings, you'll see things repainting the buildings, replacing doors. So you'll see more of the operational, the day in and day out, as opposed to the larger, big fixes. Typically, when you do the CIP project, it's going to be larger and bigger and capitalized.
Could you give an example of that?
Of which one?
Of what would be a capital improvement type project for one of the buildings? Well, obviously air conditioning.
Yeah, HVAC system would be one.
Elevator.
Yeah, elevator. If we
Okay.
Yeah, if we did any retrofit, like when we did retrofitting for the Carnegie, retrofitting would have been part of a CIP budget. So next we're going to talk about the long-range financial forecast. So as stated earlier, the last full long-range financial forecast Jennifer Phillips did in 2015. So the majority of these slides are based off of that long-range financial forecast, and that is included in each of your shape binders, and there's a section for it. So it was presented on January 14th, February 24th, 2015. It does present a potential range of financial outcomes for the city. It offers a strategies for the council to consider. It offers a roadmap for financial stability. It offered two different types of revenue and expenditure scenarios, and it was also based off of the fiscal year 14-15 adopted operating budget. Again, these are long-range financial forecasts. When we do the financial forecast, we do add assumptions in there, and we do make note of what those assumptions are. So when we start the process to redo the long-range financial forecast, we will be updating those assumptions on what the knowns are, or what we think is going to happen. So for your revenue scenarios, the two that were done in 2015 is there's a baseline, which is a modest economic recovery. So you'll see a very, very slow economic recovery for the revenue side. The second one was a baseline with a minor recession, and as I believe Chair Smithers stated, that I can't remember who stated about the recession, typically is every 10 years we have a recession. We are a little overdue for it, and so when you see this long-range financial forecast that was done in 2015, we did take into consideration for a minor recession, which still has not happened. For the expenditure scenarios, the first scenario is the current levels with escalators. So again, those are our assumptions that we're making as far as employee salaries, as far as just general expenses that we know are coming up. The second scenario we did for expenditures was the current levels with the regular escalator, so that's the same, and a modest level of asset recapitalization. As you can see, previously we did not do a lot of asset recapitalization, which is basically we're putting more money into our capital assets at the city. So what the second scenario did for the expenditures, it put in $1.6 million a year for your asset recapitalization. So here's the first scenario with the baseline. I'm not getting the assumptions on the left-hand side, so you can read over those later. But on the right-hand side, you can see for this first scenario, you'll see in fiscal year 16, we actually were in the red, which means we took in less revenues than we had expenditures. And then you can see trending over the year, you can see a slight increase on it, where it's about $100,000, $500,000, $400,000. So you can see that over the years, just with the baseline, that we did get out of the red just very slightly over the next couple of years. The second scenario, you can see the baseline with a minor recession, and the minor recession, I can't remember what year they actually started the minor recession, but here you can see we start out for fiscal year 16 in the red, so we had, again, more expenses than we had revenues. You can see we start going above the line barely, and then all of a sudden, if we have a minor recession, we go below the line, and again, this is based on a minor recession. And then here's a summary chart of those two scenarios. So you can see the red line is your general fund expenditures. Those remain constant in both scenarios. You can see if our general fund revenues as our baseline is the blue. So you can see what we have is we have our expenses, we have our revenues are slightly higher than our expenses. That's a good thing. And then if you look at the green line, that's with the minor recession. So that's where you get into the circumstance where you're not bringing in enough revenues to cover your expenses.
I think you said you started with 2015 numbers in this. Does this include Measure D and Los Alcobas in any of this?
No, it does not.
No, it doesn't.
It does not include those.
Yeah, Tim, just to clarify, this was prepared in February 2015. They didn't know that any of that stuff was even in the horizon, and which is a little bit of an issue. I mean, we are looking at pretty old data. I mean, even if you just simply look at fiscal year 18's revenue number versus the revenue numbers that are in here, they're significantly different.
Yeah, that is correct.
I think what we're getting out of this is maybe just the process of a long-range financial forecast versus the accuracy of this, or how close is it to current fiscal year 18.
That is correct. So the long range, now I'm going to show you the long range financial forecast with asset recapitalization. So this is to answer some of Pat's questions on what does a CIP project look like. This was adding $1.6 million per year. It was allocating $250,000 to buildings, $50,000 for parks, $50,000 for information technology upgrades, and then $1.25 million towards our streets. And so this is what the long-range financial forecast would look like. This is the baseline. We didn't run it off the recession. If you added $1.6 million per year in asset recapitalization, so you can see every year your deficit, it just keeps adding and adding to your deficit. There are some of the risks to the forecast, and again, these are identified in the long-range financial forecast document. It depends on what the economy does. We can forecast. Sometimes the economy will do things that we don't quite expect. Again, we expected a minor recession by this time, and it hasn't happened. So that is a risk to the forecast. The second is pension costs, which we've kind of talked about earlier. We don't know what, sometimes we just don't know what those long-term pension costs are going to be, so that's something that we have to guess at almost. Compensation increases, so if we have any type of negotiations with any of our bargaining groups or staff get increases, that doesn't always take into consideration the increases. Healthcare premiums, whether they go up or down, that's another risk to the forecast. Asset recapitalization, whether we add it in there or we don't add it in there, and then also any major new one-time expenses. So let's say we have a project that comes up, we have an emergency that happens that we actually have to cover the cost. So the forecasts it does not address that, and so again, that's why it's a forecast. We put our assumptions in there, but those are some of the risks that can affect the forecast and what the actual outcomes are.
Can I just ask you, this seems to me that this forecast was, you did a recession possibility and you did a forecast for a modest increase in the economy. The economy's, by comparison, boomed, and certainly I can see why you would be very conservative in this, but especially coming out of a recession. But it seems like the overall long-term revenue forecast is based upon the assumption that the economy wasn't going to do well, and it's actually done better than we thought.
Correct, and that's why we do need to update the long-range financial forecast.
Right, so if part of our goal, I guess, is to find out how broke we really are, because that was what was sold 3-4 years ago, it would appear that we were working with assumptions that did not prove true.
Yeah. And I do have a few updated slides at the end.
Cool.
So the summary of the findings from this particular long-range financial forecast was that baseline forecast projects a budget deficit beginning in 15 and 16 with the following year's revenues slightly exceeding expenditures. The minor recession shows that your revenues basically equal your expenditures. Operating costs, they increase only by estimated percentages. There is no increase in staff and no additional programs or projects that were added to the forecast that you just looked at. The assigned general fund reserve, so the baseline forecast projected that the reserve would be below the 25% target, and then the baseline with the minor recession did project that it would be about 14%. Asset recapitalization, again, for this moment in time in 2015, was showing that there were insufficient funds for proper building, park, IT, street maintenance, and replacement, and also insufficient revenue to support a bond or loan to build a new building. And again, that was at that time, and as Doug has pointed out, that certain projections, they came in higher than what we expected. The strategies for sustainability that were in this long-range financial forecast was to and this was a really positive thing that came out of this, because this was kind of some of my marching orders, as well as some of the items that City Council had directed staff, was to closely manage general fund expenses. And I feel over the past 3 years, we've done a great job doing that, and we can see now that our expenses are coming in lower than what we actually anticipated. Regular review fees and services. So that is part of our impact fees, is part of our user fees, and we do have a contract right now with a financial group to help us do that. Conduct annual council goal setting process, which we have been doing. Evaluate additional revenue measures, one of which ended up being Measure D that came out of this. Evaluate opportunities for economic development. Explore opportunities for annexation, which I know Mark is looking at right now. Develop long-term funding plan for asset recapitalization. So some of these are the strategies for sustainability that did come out of this original long-range financial forecast. Here are the updated numbers. So Doug, this can kind of answer some of your questions. When we did not do the complete long-range financial forecast update, but when we did the budget in fiscal year 16-17, we did update it on the numbers that we actually knew about. So again, on the left-hand side are our key assumptions. So automatically you can see sales tax, property taxes, TOT, a little higher than what is in the original version. And then here you can see fiscal year 15, we did operate in a deficit. Fiscal year 16, 17, 18, then the projections out are definitely a lot better than what we originally projected in fiscal year 15. And again, this was done before the passage of Measure D, but this was done with the assumption of Los Alcobas Hotel going online. So I feel like those projections almost counterbalanced each other, because while we didn't have the Measure D revenues in here, we expected Los Alcobas to be online sooner than it actually came online. So those revenues, so I feel like this is definitely a more accurate picture.
Can I just ask you a quick question about the Los Alcobas? I remember in the long-range forecast, it says in the forecast that $900,000 was projected for what we would be getting, the city would be getting from TOT from Los Alcobas, and I remember the ad hoc revenue committees. I was surprised to find that the report said that it was going to be $1.7 million. And that I heard Jennifer on the radio, because I wrote it down the day she did it, said it was going to be $1.2 million. Where are we with, just out of curiosity, because clearly TOT is a speculative thing. We have to guess what the hotel is going to do and how well it's going to be run, and so many things will determine it out of our control. And when we're doing a long-range revenue forecast, how close were we in determining? Clearly we had 3 different options here. What have we ended up with Los Alcobas?
They have not been in operation for a full year yet, so we don't have, I'd say the 1.2 is closer to what we are expecting, is the 1.2 million from Los Alcobas. So, and they haven't been in operation for a year yet, so,
Right.
And this year might be off because of the fires. We won't see anyone's TOT revenues until December for the October timeframe, so we still don't know how that's quite going to affect us.
Right.
The fact that Measure D is not in here could, for most of those blue things over there, you could just add 1.4 to those.
Yes, that'd be correct. From fiscal years 18 on up, you'd add 1.4. Yeah, so it definitely puts us in a healthier position. Also, remember, this doesn't account for all of the expenditures that we did for fiscal year 18, because this was done before fiscal year 18. Here's the baseline with the recession. So here you can see the numbers have changed a little bit with a minor recession, and the recession would be in fiscal years 20, 21, and 22. And that also does take into account the money that the general fund will have to pay back for the SRF loan.
Can I ask a question?
Absolutely.
So, page 26, are we looking at, are these revenue numbers, or is this the net?
That's net revenues over expenses,
Okay.
so we're showing more revenues coming in than expenses.
Okay, so when the comment was just made that these blue numbers, we would add 1.4 million to them. That's not really right, because wouldn't we be spending that money on roads and the 800,000 that was being transferred for 2 years to, so the net's not changing a whole lot. Even though we got more revenue, we've got places that it's being designated to be spent on to try and fix past problems, right? So the blue doesn't actually get bigger.
It would be a balance between the two, depending on council
Yeah, they'd
discretion.
offset. For the most part, we're not just going to keep growing. We wouldn't add 1.4 million and then end up having a reserve balance of $10 million at the end of 2026. Right, we'd spend the money.
In theory, yes.
Yeah. Okay.
But you'd get 1.4 million of benefit somewhere
Yes.
every single year. as a
Right,
result of
but
that.
this is basically a cash flow or an income statement. So you wouldn't just add 1.4 to these blue numbers and make the 2023 number $2.2 million, because you're going to get the revenue, but then you're going to spend it. So we would just...
Right, but what I'm saying is the expenses are already accounted for. It's an extra...
No, the expenses weren't accounted for.
Isn't this net?
This has expenses in it.
Yeah, this is net, so this
is
has the
net.
expenses, but this just has the baseline with a certain percentage of increase at expenses. And as Mark was saying, if council directs for one-time expenditures, we're putting more money in streets, we have to pay off SRF loan, it would counterbalance it a little bit, but there would be an additional 1.4 million in revenues.
Right.
That's not
But
accounted
if you
for the-
spent it all such that this graph didn't change, you would have $1.4 million of benefit, because you would be spending that money on something every single year. Otherwise, it would show up here.
Yes.
So the point is, the picture is a lot better than that shows it.
Yes,
to
because
be.
this was before Measure D.
Yeah.
That's correct. So the recession, so again, same thing, same scenario, where we're showing a minor recession in 2021 and 22. And then asset recapitalization looks about the same as the other chart, just the number's a little bit lower, but again, that's what the $1.6 million a year in asset recapitalization. And that is what I have for the financial overview. Hopefully, everybody is still awake.
You know, and we know that somewhere before this ends, probably we're going to have another major hotel in town, so...
Is there ever factored into your calculations for TOT the cost of the infrastructure, the damage to the infrastructure by the number of tourists that come for that particular hotel? So if they're giving us, what was it, $1.2 million you said, how much of that is going to what will that cost the city to get that $1.2 million?
No, that is not factored into it.
If I can interject here, I think the takeaway is this was generally how the last long-term financial forecast was put together, and part of what we're going to receive, is going to be worked on at some level within the city, is an updated long-term financial forecast. So there'll be a lot more assumptions going into it and certain things being placed in it, and I've suggested that long-term financial forecast needs to go out 20 years, because we're looking at long-term assets that we're trying to fund. So one of the items that we're going to end up receiving is a long-term financial forecast, that we know what dollars we're playing with when we're looking at all of the needs that the city has.
Can I make a comment? Would you agree that basically it's kind of a static state for the next 10 years? I mean, expenses and revenues, give or take, a little recession, or... I mean, considering the amount of money it would take to rebuild a city hall, a fire department, community center, et cetera, redo the roads, there's really not enough revenue in this projection to even begin to tackle those projects.
I'm going to let Mark answer that.
I think it's premature to look at that. I think we want to take a look at an updated long-range financial forecast. There are different financial strategies that can be employed to approach this, whether it's evaluating our various properties and using some of that as leverage for something down the road, or just a financing strategy that helps the city address some of these deficiencies. So I think a lot of options on the table, and the challenge starts with this committee in helping us.
Right, but what I was getting at was that within the growth of revenue being so great as to finally come up as the sole solution for financing these capital improvement projects. We need to look at the assets as you said, being leveraged.
Well, I think there are a lot of options here, and I don't know that there's any wrong approach or any right approach. I think there's a variety of options, and the council is looking to this committee for your ideas, the community's ideas, and I think that we have a future that probably will, absent a deep recession, I think our future is looking fairly good. The document that will be published Friday, that will be shared with the council on the 12th and with this committee on the 13th, will essentially identify that the city is stable, but there are risks, and one of the grades that we didn't do well on is investment in our assets, and so we know and acknowledge that there are deficiencies there that need to be addressed. And and this is a document that will look and hopefully be quite readable for the community. It will show essentially a report card in the first couple of pages, and then get into some more detail and numbers. And I think the community will find it very helpful. It will help inform some of the decision making that you'll have down the road.
Okay.
I'd just like to make some comments about the purpose of this committee. I'm going to take it right from the recitals. I've underlined things. Analyze the city's existing built facilities to assist the city with prioritizing capital improvements. Assess civic needs and opportunities. Look at utilization of community assets. When I made my comments about the tour through the facilities, that's what I thought I was doing. And then I heard you say, well, no, that's not what we're supposed to be doing. We're supposed to be doing an overarching financial analysis of the city's needs, and we won't be making specific recommendations to the city council. And if that is the purpose of this committee, then I'm very disappointed.
I think you misheard me. That's not what I said. We are going to be looking specifically and making recommendations, at least it's my understanding, to the city council as to what to do with the facilities and what to do, and how to finance those. But I wasn't getting into the weeds of what's going to happen in the next 6 months, because there happens to be maybe $300,000 in Fund 733, and tell them to fix the roof. I mean, sometime in the interim before we need to get to the end game of what the city council has asked us to do, and I think they're broader recommendations than a very specific recommendation about, patch the roof before the rainy season comes.
Well, then there really wasn't much reason for us to go through and look at those buildings.
Oh, I would beg to differ. I think everybody need to get a flavor for the condition of the building, so that then when we get the needs assessment, we have context to what we're looking at in black and white and on paper, and then based on what the community's input is, as with regards to what they think about the facilities and our own ideas, we can then formulate a recommendation to city council that's based on all that baseline data. I mean, without going and seeing what if you never walked into City Hall, even if you got a needs assessment report, personally, I would be a little bit suspect of the report, not having put my own eyes on it. So I think we definitely had to do that. Does that make sense to you?
I think what I would like to ask is, when something is happening to one of these facilities that needs fixing, how is it going to get fixed? I mean, do you have to wait until I know you have to wait to see if you can pay for it, but so Parks and Rec is in charge of fixing all the city-owned buildings, and the Carnegie building can't be used for anything because the elevator doesn't work. So do we know how much it's going to take to fix the elevator? Do we know how much it's going to take to bring Scout Hall up to par so that the children are safe in there and the rugs are cleaned? Is there some way that we can get the Parks and Rec Department to prioritize what needs doing right now, how much that's going to cost? How do we go about doing the most important things? I mean, we can't wait until April until we start doing something for some of these things that need fixing now. So how do we go about starting in on that? Or do we have a say?
Am I wrong that we have a consulting group that's working on telling us what the values are, what the needs are, what the costs are of fixing up these buildings, and we're waiting for that report before we make any decisions, but it's not going to be in April. It's coming along here, right?
Yeah, if you look under the tab that's FCNA, and you look at the second document that's in there, it's the City of St. Helena request for proposal. And on page 4, there's a scope section, which speaks to all these things we're asking of the folks that are going to be doing the needs assessment. So, I mean, that they will be telling us what it's going to cost to fix the elevator or put in a new elevator or whatnot. They will do that, but, I mean, we need this information before we can make any recommendations.
Right. I'm not saying that we need to recommend them doing something now, right this minute, but I guess what I'm trying to say is the rec department, the parks department, Carlos is in charge of everything. I'd like to know how many people work for them, for the parks and rec department, what their job is to do all the time. What do they do in their hours of work? So that, do they need more people? Do they, how do they manage their jobs is what I would like to find out also. Because
I don't know that that's our place. Mark, help me out here. I mean, I don't think we're supposed to be going into what's the programming that happens in Park and Rec. That's
it. I'll just offer some general comments, and hopefully it's helpful. This committee's in the information gathering stage right now. So today was Budget 101. And at the next meeting, we're going to talk to you, I think anticipating that we're going to talk to you about some community outreach and revisit the 2009 visioning. And then the following meeting on December 13th, we will talk to you about more specific finances and, frankly, the condition of the city's funds. And this is all intended to help inform you. And so while the process will continue into April, your focus after the new year will begin to formulate ideas and strategies and options. And in the course of, and so that process will be very exciting, quite engaging. And until we get through the information portion of this, which includes the information on the budget, the new needs assessment document, which we're all anticipating and looking forward to. This will be an inventory of the required space needs for the city, the value of its assets, the maintenance requirement, the optimal maintenance requirements. So that's sometimes what cities find themselves in is, particularly in small cities, they are so strapped with limited resources that they don't take the time to plan. And as a result, they don't have an opportunity, they don't take the opportunity to prioritize the needs, and things they slip behind, and there's not a thoughtful document or focus that guides the budget development process. So this city doesn't have a document and research that takes into consideration the needs, the maintenance needs of all of these assets. And it takes place, and the decision making takes place in a political environment and a budget reality environment, particularly over the course of that deep recession where very few resources are available. So even if you had the best plan on the shelf, sometimes the budget reality is you can't fund it, and you see other services cut. So the great news is that the council has invested in a needs assessment, which is going to give us the dollars that we're going to then program into the budget to help us deliver the maintenance that's needed for the assets and also restore the assets. And then part of the plan will be, and strategy will be, how do we get there? And the council is looking to this committee for their ideas on how to look at these various assets and help us put them back together and or update them or replace them. And so it is The day-to-day is probably a little too far into the weeds, but I do think that you have reasonable questions and inquiries based on what you see, but it's a combination of a lot of different things, and even the little things like the available space behind City Hall, that generated about the equivalent of one body. The revenue that comes out of that building generates the equivalent of one staff position. So if we happen to occupy the building, we either cut a position or we take a chunk out of that growing reserve. And so there are trade-offs on all of these things, which is part of the challenge here is there are always trade-offs with the various options. Hope that's helpful.
I do appreciate the enthusiasm. I really do. And I think as a business owner, you see something that you don't like, or you see something that needs to be fixed, and you go fix it and take care of it. And so that's what you saw a lot of things that need fixing, and you're probably pulling your hair out going, why don't we just fix it? And I hope Mark maybe explained to you why you just don't fix it.
I do understand that, I definitely what we're doing. It's just that I'm a person that likes it done tomorrow, but I know it can't happen. So I know we're going to do the best we can, and we'll come up with a great plan.
Trust me, if anybody thinks government moves too slow, it's me.
Yeah, and I'm going to harp on this for just another second. I understand what you're saying. I totally agree with it. I'm a respecter of process. But isn't it possible to get a contractor out to do just something like, I just hate to see dry rot growing. I hate to see the roof leaking. I'm talking about just 4 or 5 things that are safety things. Don't we have enough money in the general fund to call a contractor out, get an estimate, and fix some of these things now?
Can I, from a business perspective, that's an interesting question, and I didn't go on the facilities tour, so I didn't see maybe specifically what you're talking about. But if there are items of deferred maintenance, and if I'm in a position where I'm considering tearing the building down, I might not be thinking too hard about spending some money on this deferred maintenance because I'm just throwing it away now. Now, if it's truly a safety issue and you got exposed wires or certain trip hazards or things like that, I think you definitely want to do everything you can. But I believe, too, we're in a state where they don't want to spend a bunch of money on things that they may sell the building, they may tear the building down, they may need to have a different use and need to be remodeled. I mean, that's so I
think that's a valid point. Sorry.
Well, to that, just real quick to that point, could we get we've looked at a dozen city properties, could we get a estimate of the equity in each of those properties versus the debt, estimated equity, versus market value minus debt? So
I don't think we don't really have any debt on any of the properties. They're not specifically encumbered.
Okay, I was just wondering about what the equity is in each building.
We are going to get market value information from the needs assessment consultants.
Okay,
but as far as equity, not any one property is specifically encumbered with debt. There is debt that the city has, but it's I don't think it's even encumbered. I doubt it. Yeah.
I guess what I think I understand. What I mean is on a standalone basis, what would each property's equity be in the open market?
Appraised value.
That information is coming.
That's what's coming.
It's coming in the needs assessment.
Okay, and we don't think there's much debt on a per building basis.
There isn't any. I don't think nothing specifically encumbered.
To be retired.
Okay.
I think in terms of the short-term fixes, I think we all understand how we were watching roofs leak and wondering why somebody didn't just throw a tarp on top of that. And I talked to Carlos about that, about the roaches. Why isn't somebody spraying? He said somebody did come in and spray, but there's nobody following up. And it goes back to my original comment, which was we don't have anybody in the city government whose job it is to maintain those 12 buildings. That's all they do. And he has no staff to do that. Carlos has a lot of things to do, and that's not one of them. So if you want to fix something, you want to fix the dry run, there's nobody who you go to and say, this needs to be done, what are you doing about it? And I think that's part of what we will be suggesting would be useful, to have an overall maintenance plan, an overall maintenance person, and a staff to work with him that could fit into this so that we can maintain what we own so that it doesn't literally fall down.
I think
I have a question.
Susan's point, or Susan's point, oh, sorry, jumped in there.
I have a question as far as the last chart of the asset recapitalization. This is in other words, the projection is that we need $17 million to fix or repair or...
What the asset recapitalization is if we put $1.6 million per year from the general fund just in recapitalizing assets, this is what it would look like projected over the years if we did $1.6 million. So we'd run into the deficit every year, so it basically, it would compound on top of each other. So $1.6 million per year, taken out over the years, you'd have a deficit of $17 million if you actually...
But it wasn't based on any specific assessment of the repair costs for the facilities.
Right.
No, it was
You
not.
could
It
probably
was just
spend that
generalities.
$1.6 million a year just on streets.
Yes.
And it doesn't include the 10 years of Measure D, to go back to that, which would be 14 of that 17 million there. So these numbers are funny numbers at this point.
Hence, we're going to do a updated long-term financial forecast that's...
Right.
You know.
I have to, if I may, it's a gloomy day when you go out and see all of the damage that the buildings have taken on over the years of deferred maintenance. But I have to say, this report tonight finally puts to bed the idea that we're dead broke, and that's a good thing for the city, and we can stop putting that in the paper. We're broke, we need it, we're broke. And the other thing I found was that although there's a lot of damage in those buildings, a lot of it is maintenance damage that can be repaired. It's not tear it down damage. And I was terribly encouraged by the options that we have. We own a lot of property. A lot of it's completely unused and underused, and there are a lot of things we can do to generate enough money to really fix this town up. Not to mention the fact that the budgets are doing pretty well and the economy for the moment is doing pretty well. So I'm pretty encouraged, frankly, as opposed to depressed by this.
Will the needs assessment have a short-term maintenance recommendation and also look at the asset value to possibly have some other long-term disposition of some assets?
There's the scope section based on that page I just mentioned before, and I think it is going to speak to all those things you just talked about, and we will be getting that sometime in January-ish?
We're hoping to get a draft by late December.
Okay.
And the answer is yes. It will include optimal maintenance requirements and costs to bring the building back up to current conditions, or what should be optimal conditions.
Just a footnote on that, because it sounds like obviously there's a short-term need that needs to be bumped up and addressed, to your point, Pat. And then at the same time, we could take a look at the strategic position, if you will, of the properties as far as their asset value, without overspending on getting the maintenance caught up on a per-property basis. We could also look at some longer-term strategic solutions as far as maybe disposition of assets and consolidation or migration to other facilities, between facilities or to other facilities. I hope that makes sense.
So are we done talking about finance? I think there was one person out in the audience that had a question. Did you still, if you want to go up, thanks.
Please take my name.
Yeah.
I'm Anna Schramm. I'm a resident of St. Helena. I've been here for about 6 or so years, a taxpayer and a member of the community. So I was just curious, just to go back to, and I have some background in finance and marketing, but I wasn't sure. You were trying to distinguish between sort of the private sector financing versus city or government financing and financials. And then differences between the two. I'm just curious, could you clarify the idea or the concept of asset recapitalization? Is when you talk about the 1.6 million and then you project it out over the 10 or so years, is the idea similar to the private sector where you sort of pool your assets and then you use them to finance? In this case, this would be capital improvements to the city properties, and that's what the 1.6 million is. I'm still not clear as to what you mean by recapitalizing the city's assets.
This wasn't, it wasn't used in terms of financing mechanisms. It was actually reinvesting general fund monies, so pay-go cash into our capital assets to actually get them up to where they could potentially be. So it wasn't using it as funding leverage. It was literally just cash that was coming in pay-go projects.
Okay. And then another question on the city's sort of fixed expenses. What percentage of the general fund would those account for? Is it it sounded like it was a big chunk, so there's not really a lot of flexibility that we might have in terms of variable expenses that could be maybe, levered up and down, freeing up some capital for other purposes. Does that make sense?
It does. The exact percentage I don't have. One of the higher expenditures for it is our personnel costs. So salary and benefits for general fund does attribute to, for this fiscal year, it's 57% of the general fund monies.
Mm-hmm.
So you figure on top of that, our total general fund budget is a little over $13 million. So you figure 57% of that, the fixed cost, is for salaries and benefits. In addition, we will have our debt financing. For our general fund, it is pretty low, so it's about $200,000 a year. Next year, we drop off $100,000 because one of the loans is paid off. And then the last fixed cost was the, why did I go totally blank on what that was?
Maintenance, facilities maintenance or something like that?
No, it wasn't
the
facilities.
MOE?
I can go back. Yes, the maintenance of effort. Thank you. It's the maintenance of effort for the, for our Measure T dollars.
Okay.
So here we go. I'll get back to, I had the three. So the debt service, the labor costs, and the maintenance of effort. So out of those, majority is definitely the labor costs of being 50% of the general fund.
And our city worker salaries, are they contracted so you can sort of project those out as a fixed cost for several years? Are they renewed on an annual basis? How does that work?
We do have MOUs, so memorandum of understanding, with our police department as well as with our SHIA, which is our St. Helena Employees Association. Mm-hmm. They are negotiated contracts that typically come up for renewal anywhere between 2 years and 5 years. But yes, we can project the cost out on those on the MOUs.
Yeah. Just a general comment, it sounds like the committee has a really difficult challenge just having heard this one meeting, which is, not only, it seems like you would have to go through a very sophisticated financial analysis exercise to really evaluate. Because on the one hand, it's just a question of, how do we maintain the existing set of 12 buildings? But then the broader ask that the City Council is asking for is give us recommendations on the long-term financial future and sustainability of our city, which is seems like a big challenge.
Piece of cake. Not a problem at all. We do it all the time.
So good luck. Thank you.
Thank you.
So we're actually turning into pumpkins here. Maybe we can get through review the meeting calendar and wrap it up. So, Mark, you guys want to chat about what you've been proposing? Or April? No? Okay.
I'd love to. Let me pull up the calendar here.
Allison.
So tonight is the briefing on the city finances. We have provided you all with the calendar. There are some also available online as well as in the back. Next week we do plan on, as Mark mentioned, revisiting the 2009 vision statement and also discussing our update on our public engagement process. We want to make sure the community is involved, and we'll go ahead and discuss that. And then the following week, we do plan on having April come back. As she mentioned, she will have the diagnostic tool available Friday, and she will be going over that. And then also we'll be having an update, hopefully from EMG, which is the Facilities Needs Assessment firm, and hopefully they'll be able to come and give a presentation on what you will be seeing in the near future.
Okay. And then for sure we'll be off on the 27th and the 3rd of January and maybe the 20th, but we'll figure that out as we get closer to it.
That's correct.
Okay?
So we're meeting all Wednesdays, the same time?
Same time, same place, Wednesdays, 6:30. We will be putting out agendas as early as possible.
And what channel are we going to be on?
We'll be on channel 27, not 28, and also live streamed on the city's website. So you can go back and watch as many times as you'd like.
Okay. Anything else for the good of the order? Okay. Meeting adjourned.